The great crystal dome of the Galactic Harmony Council shook as another star system went dark on the massive display screen. Ambassador Veltar of the Luminari pressed his 4 long fingers against the communication panel, his blue skin flickering, with patterns of fear and desperation. Around him, representatives from dozens of alien species watched in horror as red markers spread across their galaxy map like a disease. The Vex-High swarm has taken the outer rim, Veltar announced to the packed chamber, his voice barely steady. 17 worlds have gone silent in the past 3 days. Their harvester fleets consume everything they touch, planets, space stations, even the stars themselves for fuel. The chamber fell into a terrible quiet. The Vex-High were ancient machines that had appeared from beyond the galaxy's edge with one simple purpose: to consume all organic life and energy they could find. They were efficient, ruthless, and seemed to learn from every battle they fought. Admiral Kix of the Thorian Republic stood from his seat, his scaled reptilian face showing defeat. The Thorians were known across the galaxy as the strongest military force with ships and weapons that had kept peace for centuries. If even they looked hopeless, then the situation was truly desperate. Our combined battle fleets engaged the Vex-High advance forces near the Kepler sector, Admiral Kix reported, his voice heavy with shame. We managed to destroy perhaps 3% of their ships before we had to retreat. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can fire them. Each time we hit them with plasma cannons, they modified their shields. When we used quantum torpedoes, they changed their hull composition within minutes. We have never faced an enemy like this. Several delegates began talking at once, their various alien languages creating a chaos of clicks, whistles, and harmonic sounds. Fear filled the great dome like a poisonous gas. These were civilized species who had lived in peace for generations. War was something they read about in history books, not something they actually fought. There must be something we can do, called out researcher Nyleth from the Quilran Collective, her thin gray form trembling. Some weapon we haven't tried, some strategy we haven't considered. Admiral Kix shook his massive head. The mathematics are simple. The Vex-High outnumber our entire combined military by approximately 1,000 to 1. Their ships are larger, faster, and more heavily armed than anything we possess. Worse, they learn from every encounter. By the time we develop new weapons, they have already adapted to counter them. The chamber fell silent again. Everyone knew what this meant. In perhaps a month, maybe less, the Vex-High would reach the core. Worlds where billions of beings lived in cities that had never known war. The peaceful civilizations that had built the Galactic Harmony Council would be consumed, their entire history erased as if they had never existed. Researcher Neelath spoke up again, her voice so quiet that the chamber's audio systems had to amplify. There is one possibility we haven't considered. The deep space monitoring stations have detected signals from several primitive worlds in the outer spiral arms. Most are what we classify as death worlds, planets with dangerous conditions that somehow produced intelligent life. Deathworlders? Admiral Kix's voice carried what might have been bitter laughter among his species. You mean primitives who haven't even achieved faster-than-light travel? Species that are still fighting wars among themselves on single planets? What could they possibly contribute besides providing more victims for the Vex-High to consume? But Ambassador Veltar was already moving toward the emergency broadcast controls. His skin had shifted from blue fear patterns to the golden glow of desperate hope. We send the call to everyone who can receive it. Every world, every system, every species that has achieved radio communication. We tell them the galaxy is dying and ask for whatever help they can provide. This is madness, Admiral Kix protested. Even if these Deathworlders could receive our message, even if they somehow understood it, what could they send us? A few crude ships with primitive weapons. Veltar's hands moved across the broadcast controls with practiced speed. Admiral, when your house is burning down, you don't refuse help from anyone willing to carry water. Maybe these Deathworlders will surprise us. The emergency broadcast array powered up with a deep humming sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of the station. This was technology that could send a message across the entire galaxy, reaching every world with radio capability. It was only used for the most desperate situations, and this certainly qualified. Citizens of the galaxy, Veltar spoke into the transmitter, his words being translated into thousands of languages and broadcast on all frequencies. This is Ambassador Veltar of the Galactic Harmony Council. We face extinction at the hands of the Vex High Swarm. If you receive this message, if you have ships, if you have weapons, if you have the will to fight, please come to the Kepler sector. Help us make our final stand. The future of all organic life in this galaxy depends on your answer. The message shot out across space at faster than light speeds, racing toward distant stars and unknown worlds. Most civilized planets would receive it within hours. The more distant, primitive worlds might take days or weeks to detect the signal, assuming they had the technology to do so. On most worlds, the message would be ignored or dismissed as impossible to answer. Some primitive civilizations would receive it but lack the technology to respond. Others would be too focused on their own local conflicts to care about galactic wars. But on one small blue-green world, in an unremarkable system, a young Korean communications officer named Daeho was working the night shift at the Jeju Island Deep Space Monitoring Station. He was drinking his 5th cup of coffee and fighting to stay awake when every piece of equipment in the station suddenly came alive with signals unlike anything he had ever seen. Daeho stared at his screens in shock as data flooded in. The signal was clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, and was being broadcast on frequencies that suggested technology far beyond anything Earth possessed. His hand shook as he began recording everything, his mind racing to understand what he was seeing. The translation algorithms took nearly an hour to make sense of the alien languages, but when they finally produced results, Daeho felt his blood turn cold. Somewhere out in space, an entire galaxy was dying. Ancient machines were consuming world after world, and the only thing standing between them and complete victory was a desperate alliance of alien species who were asking anyone, anywhere, for help. Daeho reached for his emergency communication system and began placing calls to every military commander, every government official, and every scientist he could reach. Within minutes, the message was racing through Earth's communication networks, translated into dozens of human languages. The galaxy had called for help. Now the question was, how would Earth answer? Admiral Jin A. Park stood in the command center of Seoul Orbital Station, watching through the massive windows as Earth prepared for something that had never happened before in human history. Every shipyard on the planet was working at maximum speed. Every space dock was filled with vessels being converted for war, and every military base was sending their ships toward the assembly point near Luna. The holographic displays around her showed numbers that seemed impossible. Captain Minho approached with the latest reports, his face showing a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Admiral, the final count from the Australian Continental Defence Fleet just came in," Minho reported, checking his tablet. "They're sending everything they have. That brings our total deployment to 7,412 vessels." Janae nodded slowly, her weathered face showing the stress of the past week. She had spent 30 years building Earth's space defenses, preparing for the day when humanity might face an alien invasion. She never imagined that instead of defending Earth from aliens, she would be taking Earth's entire military force to save aliens from something else. "Break it down for me, Minho," she said, still watching the streams of ships moving past the station. "I want to know exactly what we're committing to this mission." Minho consulted his tablet and began reading. "The North American Federation is contributing their entire carrier fleet, 847 vessels including their flagship carriers and all support ships. The European Alliance has stripped their orbital defense platforms and is sending 632 ships. The African Coalition converted their entire asteroid mining fleet for combat, 490 ships with industrial plasma cutters and mining charges." "And our contribution?" Jin-A asked, though she already knew the answer. "The Korean Unified Fleet is sending 430 ships, including our newest destroyers and the experimental battleship Seoul's Pride. Admiral, we're not just sending our military vessels. The civilian shipping companies have volunteered cargo haulers, passenger liners, even research vessels. Every ship that can mount a weapon or carry troops is joining the fleet. Through the viewports, Jin-A could see the incredible sight of humanity's space fleet assembling. Sleek military destroyers moved alongside converted mining ships. Massive cargo haulers bristling with hastily mounted weapons flew in formation, with small research vessels carrying experimental technology from Earth's secret laboratories. Dr. Subin approached from her workstation, carrying the latest analysis of the alien distress signal. The xenobiology expert had been working non-stop since the message arrived, trying to understand exactly what Earth was volunteering to fight. "Admiral, I finished translating the technical data included in their broadcast," Dr. Subin reported, her voice tired but determined. "These Vex-Hi are unlike anything we've ever imagined. They're machines but not simple robots. They learn, they adapt, they evolve their tactics faster than organic minds can think. According to the alien data, they modify their technology in real time during battles." Jin-A turned from the viewport to face the scientist. "What kind of advantages do they have over our forces? Their ships are larger and more heavily armed than anything we have. Their weapons technology appears to be centuries ahead of ours. But Admiral, the most dangerous thing about them is their ability to adapt. The alien reports say that any weapon used against them becomes ineffective within minutes as they develop countermeasures." "Then we don't use the same weapon twice," Jin-A replied simply. Navigation Officer Tae Young looked up from his calculations. "Admiral, at maximum burn, we can reach this Kepler sector in 67 hours. But ma'am, shouldn't we send scouts first? Maybe establish communication with these aliens before we arrive? This could be some kind of trap, or a misunderstanding, or—" Jin-A cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Officer Tae Young, when someone is drowning, you don't send a committee to study the water temperature. You jump in and start pulling them to safety." She moved to the center of the command center, her voice carrying the authority that had made her the youngest admiral in Korean naval history. "Besides, we've already committed everything. There's no backing out now." The communication system chimed, indicating an incoming priority message. The face of General Haiwan appeared on the main screen, calling from the United Nations military. "Command in New York. Admiral Park, the Security Council has just finished their emergency session," General Haiwan reported. The vote was unanimous. Earth commits its full military strength to answering this galactic distress call. You have complete authority to engage any hostile forces and take whatever action you deem necessary to assist these alien allies. Jin-A saluted. "Understood, General. We won't let the galaxy down." "Admiral," General Haiwan continued, "I want you to understand what you're carrying with you. This isn't just Earth's military. This is our statement to the universe about who we are as a species. Make it a good one." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in thoughtful silence. Jin-A looked around at her officers, seeing the same mixture of excitement and terror on every face. They were about to make first contact with alien civilizations while simultaneously fighting a war against enemy forces that had conquered half the galaxy. "Admiral," Captain Minho said quietly, "what if we're not enough? What if even our entire fleet can't make a difference against these machines?" Jin-A smiled, and for a moment she looked less like a military commander and more like the young Korean girl who had dreamed of flying among the stars. "Minho, humans have a saying. It's better to die standing than to live on your knees. These aliens asked for help. They probably expected a few primitive ships from some backward world. Instead, they're getting everything we have." She activated the fleet-wide communication system, and her image appeared on screens throughout the massive armada. 7,000 ships carried her words to nearly 2 million human beings who had volunteered to leave Earth's protection behind to help complete. "Strangers, all ships, all personnel, this is Admiral Park," she began, her voice steady and strong. "In just over 60 hours we will arrive at the Kepler sector to face an enemy that has conquered most of a galaxy. They are technologically superior, numerically superior, and have defeated every force sent against them." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But they have never faced humans before. They have never fought beings who answer distress calls from strangers. They have never encountered a species that sends everything they have to help people they've never met. Throughout our history, humans have fought for many reasons: for territory, for resources, for ideology, for survival. Today, we fight for something simpler and more powerful than any of those. We fight because someone asked for help and we said yes. The fleet began its journey toward the galactic core, leaving Earth defended by nothing but automated satellites and the hope that they would return. As the blue-green world fell away behind them, Admiral Ginny Park wondered what they would find when they reached their destination. She hoped they would arrive in time to make a difference. She feared they might arrive too late to save anyone, but either way, they were going. The Galactic Harmony Council's emergency command station in the Kepler sector looked like a monument to failure and desperation. Ships from 17 different alien species formed a ragged defensive line around the last inhabited worlds in the region. But even the most optimistic observer could see that they were doomed. Most of the vessels were science ships or lightly armed transports because the Harmony Council had never been designed for war. Ambassador Veltar stood before the main tactical display, his blue luminary skin flickering with patterns of despair as he watched the sensor readings. The HFY advanced scouts were already testing their defenses, sending small groups of machines to probe for weaknesses. Each probe learned something new about their weapons and tactics, and that information was instantly shared with the main swarm approaching from deep space. "How long do we have?" asked Admiral Kix of the Thorian Republic, his scaled reptilian form showing the exhaustion of someone who had not slept in days. "The main HFY force will arrive in approximately 6 hours," replied Tactical Officer Zulvan, her tentacled arms moving across multiple control panels simultaneously. "Our long-range sensors show a force of over 3 million vessels, including harvester ships large enough to consume entire moons." Veltar closed his 4 eyes and tried to find some trace of hope in the situation. They had managed to evacuate most of the civilian population from the threatened worlds, but there was nowhere left to run. The HFY were spreading across the galaxy like a plague, and this was the last line of defense for billions of innocent beings. "Sir," called Communications Officer Yulkin from his station, "I'm receiving a transmission. It's on one of the frequencies we used for the emergency broadcast." Veltar's skin brightened slightly with hope patterns. "One of the Deathworlds is responding? Put it on the main screen." "Sir," Yulkin said, his voice strange, "I think you need to see this first." The young officer activated his sensor display, and every being in the command center fell completely silent. Where they had expected to see perhaps one primitive ship, or maybe a small squadron of crewed vessels, the sensors showed something that seemed impossible. Space itself was alive with lights. Thousands upon thousands of ships in perfect formation, their fusion drives creating a constellation of blue fire against the darkness. The fleet stretched across millions of kilometers, organized into battle groups that suggested military thinking, far more sophisticated than any Deathworld should possess. "How many?" Veltar whispered. "Computer estimates 7,400 vessels," Yulkin replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "Sir, some of these ships are massive. They're showing energy signatures that rival our largest battle cruisers." "Admiral." Kix pushed forward, his reptilian features showing skepticism. "This must be an error. No primitive world could field such a force. The power requirements alone would exceed the total output of most star systems." The main communication system activated, and suddenly they were looking at something none of them had ever seen before: a human face. The being on the screen had pale skin, dark hair with streaks of gray, and eyes the color of steel that seemed to look directly through the camera at each person watching. "This is Admiral Ginny Park of the Earth Defense Coalition," the human said, her voice calm and professional. "Despite the incredible circumstances, we received your distress call. We're here to help." Behind her, they could see the command deck of her flagship, a bustling center of activity where other humans moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for battle against odds that would have sent most civilized species fleeing in terror. Ambassador Veltar found his voice first. "Admiral Park, we are grateful for your response, but you must understand the situation. The HFY forces number in the millions. Their technology is centuries beyond anything we have encountered. Their ability to adapt and learn makes conventional, Warfare impossible. Perhaps you should consider evacuating your people while there is still time. The human admiral's expression didn't change. Ambassador, humans don't retreat from someone else's fight. We came here to help, not to run away. What do you need us to do? Admiral Kick stepped into view of the communication pickup, his massive form dwarfing the other aliens around him. Deathworlder, your courage is admirable, but tactics require more than bravery. The Vexhai adapt to our weapons within minutes of first contact. They learn our formations, study our strategies, and develop countermeasures faster than we can implement new plans. How do you propose to fight an enemy that becomes immune to whatever you use against them? A second human appeared on screen, beside Admiral Park, a younger male with the bearing of someone accustomed to ground combat. Then we don't give them time to adapt, Colonel Wu Jin said simply. Admiral, we've analyzed the approach patterns from your sensor data. They're efficient, logical, predictable. They expect rational tactics from rational opponents. Admiral Park's expression shifted into something that made several of the watching aliens instinctively step backward. Her smile was not cruel, but it carried a promise of violence that most civilized species had never learned to recognize. Good thing we're not feeling particularly rational today. Colonel, initiate battle plan chaos. Understood, Admiral. All ships are standing by for dispersal pattern Omega. The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving the alien fleet commanders staring at a blank screen. Around them, their own tactical displays showed the human fleet beginning to move into attack formations that followed no doctrine any of them recognized. What? Admiral Kix asked quietly. Is battle plan chaos? No one had an answer, but they were about to find out. The human ships were scattering across three-dimensional space in patterns that seemed random, but somehow maintained perfect communication and coordination. Individual vessels were breaking away from the main formation and accelerating toward attack positions that made no tactical sense. They're positioning themselves between us and the Vexhai approach vector, observed Tactical Officer Zulven. But their formation is completely irregular. There's no unified command structure, no clear battle line, no reserve forces. Maybe that's the point, Veltar said thoughtfully. If we can't understand what they're doing, perhaps the Vexhai won't be able to either. 6 hours later, when the main Vexhai swarm arrived expecting to find the remnants of a defeated coalition, they instead encountered something unprecedented in their millions of years of existence. The mechanical intelligences that had conquered. Dozens of galaxies found themselves facing an enemy that operated on principles they had never encountered. The first Vexhai harvester ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately began scanning for targets. Their sensors detected the expected alien defensive positions, but also found thousands of unknown vessels scattered throughout the battle space in what appeared to be completely random positions. The Vexhai command protocols initiated standard engagement procedures, identify enemy capabilities, analyze tactical formations, develop appropriate countermeasures, execute optimal attack patterns. But as their sensors gathered data on the human fleet, their analysis systems began encountering errors. The Deathworlder ships showed energy signatures consistent with advanced fusion technology, but their weapon systems were a mixture of technologies that ranged from crude chemical explosives to exotic particle beams. Some vessels appeared to be military designs, while others were clearly converted civilian craft. Most disturbing of all, there was no identifiable command structure or tactical doctrine. For the first time in their existence, the Vexhai found themselves confused. That confusion was about to become terror. The first lesson the Vexhai swarm learned about human warfare was that humans did not fight like any other species in the galaxy's recorded history, where civilized races formed orderly battle lines and engaged in careful exchanges of fire. While calculating acceptable losses, the human fleet exploded into action like a disturbed hive of angry insects. Individual ships broke formation and attacked from impossible angles. Fighters dove directly into the weapons range of massive Vexhai dreadnoughts. Capital ships used their own damaged hulls as improvised battering rams. Captain Byung-ho commanded the destroyer Sol's Hammer as it completed its 13th attack. Run against a Vexhai harvester ship 10 times its size. His vessel shook under the impact of enemy fire, but he kept pushing forward through the mechanical swarm like a man possessed. "Engineering, I need more power to the forward plasma cannons," he called out over the noise of alarms and explosions. "Sir," replied Chief Engineer Na Young, her voice tight with stress, "we're already running at 130% of safe operating parameters. The fusion reactor is showing signs of instability. If we push it any harder, we risk a containment breach." Captain Byung-ho looked at his tactical display, which showed his ship surrounded by enemy vessels that were trying to adapt to his weapons. Each time he fired the plasma cannons, the Vex-High ships adjusted their shield frequencies. When he switched to kinetic projectiles, they modified their armor composition. But there was one thing they couldn't adapt to fast enough. "Then we'll have to finish this before the reactor gives out," he said, diving his ship directly toward the Harvester's main power core. "All hands prepare for ramming speed." Similar scenes were playing out across the entire three-dimensional battlefield. Human ships pushed their technology far beyond safe limits, using tactics that seemed suicidal to any rational observer. But the Vex-High, for all their ability to adapt and learn, had never encountered a species that treated their own survival as optional when fighting for others. Admiral Jin-A Park watched from the bridge of her flagship as the battle unfolded, in ways that no military academy had ever taught. Unlike the alien commanders who were trying to minimize casualties and preserve their forces, she had launched every ship, knowing that many would not return. The difference in tactics was so fundamental that it might as well have been a completely different kind of warfare. "Admiral," reported Commander He Jin, monitoring the battle from her position at the tactical station. "The Vex-High are attempting to adapt to our attack patterns, but they're having difficulty. Our ships are operating independently, with each captain making tactical decisions in real time. There's no central pattern for them to analyze and counter." "That's because we don't have attack patterns," Admiral Park replied, watching as a squadron of human fighters performed maneuvers that violated every rule of space combat. "Every ship out there is making it up as they go along. How do you adapt to pure chaos?" The answer, as the battle continued, became increasingly clear. "You didn't." Lieutenant Colonel Ji-hun led what remained of his fighter squadron through the spaces between massive Vex-High capital ships, delivering nuclear warheads to critical systems, while enemy point defense systems tried desperately to track his unpredictable movements. He had lost half his pilots in the first hour of combat, including his squadron leader Major So-young, who had turned her damaged fighter into a guided missile and rammed it directly into a Vex-High command node while transmitting targeting data for follow-up strikes. "Phoenix Squadron, this is Phoenix Leader," Ji-hun called over the radio to his remaining pilots. "Enemy Harvester at coordinate 77 Mark IV is showing damage to its primary power coupling. I'm going in for a nuclear strike. If I don't make it out, Lieutenant Yoon-ji has command." "Sir, that's a suicide run," replied Lieutenant Yoon-ji. "The radiation from that ship's core will kill you even if you survive the explosion." "Then you'd better make sure my death counts for something," Ji-hun answered, accelerating his fighter toward the enormous enemy vessel. "Take out their communications array while they're distracted." From their command ships, the alien observers watched this exchange with a mixture of horror and admiration. Admiral Kix of the Thorian Republic had considered his own people to be the galaxy's greatest warriors, but they had never fought with this level of casual disregard for personal survival. "This is madness," he muttered, watching as human ships continued to attack despite taking casualties that should have forced any rational fleet to retreat. "They're losing vessels at an unsustainable rate." "But they're winning," observed Ambassador E. Veltar, his luminary skin flickering with patterns of amazement. "Look at the tactical display, Admiral. For the first time in recorded history, the Vex-High advance has not just stopped, they're actually retreating." It was true. Across the battlefield, the mechanical swarm that had conquered half the galaxy was pulling back from contact with the human fleet. Their adaptive algorithms, designed to counter logical military tactics, were failing to process the sheer unpredictability of human combat doctrine. They had been programmed to fight opponents who valued their own lives and made rational decisions based on cost-benefit analysis. They had no protocols for dealing with beings who viewed their own deaths as acceptable prices to pay for victory. The Vex-High command systems began running probability calculations and found results that their programming classified as impossible. The Deathworlder fleet was simultaneously taking heavy casualties and inflicting damage at rates that violated all known military mathematics. Individual human ships were achieving kill ratios that suggested either impossible luck or technology that exceeded their sensor readings by orders of magnitude. What the machines could not understand was that humans were not fighting with superior technology or tactics. They were fighting with something that no artificial intelligence had ever been programmed to expect: the absolute conviction that some things were worth dying for, even if those things belonged to complete strangers. Captain Yu-Jin of the converted cargo hauler Inchin's Courage had originally been a civilian merchant captain before volunteering for the fleet. His ship carried mining charges instead of military weapons, and his crew consisted of dock workers and freight handlers who had never seen combat. But when a HFY destroyer broke through the human lines and began targeting the alien refugee ships, he didn't hesitate. "All hands prepare for emergency acceleration," he announced over the ship's communication system. "We're going to ram that destroyer before it can reach the civilians." "Captain," called his makeshift weapons officer, a former loading dock supervisor named Hong Sik, "we could try to disable it with the mining charges instead of ramming. Maybe we don't have to die." "Maybe," Captain Yu-Jin agreed. "But ramming is guaranteed to work. The mining charges might not be enough." He looked around at his crew of volunteers, ordinary people who had left their families and jobs to answer an alien distress call. "Anyone who wants to abandon ship can use the escape pods. No one will think less of you." Nobody moved toward the escape pods. The Inchin's Courage accelerated toward the HFY destroyer, its civilian crew working with desperate efficiency to maximize the impact. When the two ships collided, the explosion was visible from the other side of the battle zone. Admiral Park's voice crackled across all human frequencies. "All ships, the enemy main force is withdrawing beyond the asteroid belt. Do not pursue. Past the defensive perimeter. We hold this line and we hold it together." As the immediate battle ended, the surviving human ships began regrouping, while alien observers tried to process what they had witnessed. A HFY swarm, the terror of the galaxy for millions of years, had retreated from battle for the first time in recorded history. And they had been defeated not by superior weapons or brilliant tactics, but by something much simpler and more terrible: humans who refused to accept that any fight was unwinnable when innocent lives were at stake. But Admiral Park was already studying the long-range sensor readings, her expression grim as she analyzed the data streaming in from deep space reconnaissance drones. "Commander Hyjin, get me casualty reports and damage assessments on all remaining vessels," she ordered. "Then contact Earth Command on the emergency frequency." "Ma'am, what should I tell them?" "Tell them we won the first battle," Admiral Park replied, watching as more HFY signatures appeared on the edge of sensor range. "But this was just their advance force testing our capabilities. The real war is about to begin." 3 months after the Battle of Kepler Sector, the war had transformed from a galactic catastrophe into something that resembled an actual conflict between opposing forces. The tide had turned not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through a fundamental change in how the galaxy approached warfare itself. Admiral Jin A. Park stood in the war room of the massive command station that now orbited what had once been a major HFY stronghold. The station had been built from the combined resources of dozens of species, but it was designed using human, tactical principles that emphasized rapid response and decentralized command structures. Around the central holographic display, representatives from 47 different alien species watched as she outlined the next phase of operations. "The HFY have adapted to our initial tactics," Admiral Park reported, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought impossible battles and won them. "They're no longer retreating automatically when faced with chaotic attack patterns. However, they continue to struggle with our core strategic principle, that victory sometimes requires accepting losses that seem unacceptable." Captain Hae Young, of the Korean Expeditionary Force, now commanding a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels, nodded in agreement. "They're machines, Admiral. Even their most advanced artificial intelligence systems cannot truly understand why organic beings would sacrifice themselves for strangers. To them, it represents a fundamental error in cost-benefit analysis. Ambassador Veltar, whose luminary skin now flickered with patterns that his people associated with deep respect, spoke up from his position at the diplomatic station. Admiral Park, the Galactic Council has authorized me to make a formal request. We would like Earth to consider joining our alliance permanently. Your people have changed our understanding of what is possible when facing overwhelming odds. The request surprised no one. Over the past 3 months, human tactical doctrines had spread throughout the Allied fleet like a beneficial virus. Species that had never cooperated before were now fighting alongside each other using strategies that would have been considered suicidal before humans demonstrated their effectiveness. Admiral Kix of the Thorian Republic, his scaled features showing a combination of respect and bewilderment, stepped forward. My people have always considered ourselves the galaxy's greatest warriors. We were wrong. You don't just fight wars. You fight as if the very concept of defeat doesn't exist in your language. Admiral Park smiled, but her expression remained serious. Admiral Kix, defeat always exists as a possibility. We simply don't allow that possibility to prevent us from doing what needs to be done. She activated the strategic display, showing current battle lines that stretched across 3 sectors of the galaxy. The Vexhi are regrouping near the galactic rim. Our intelligence suggests they are preparing for a final assault using everything they have left. Dr. Subin, now serving as Earth's chief xenobiology advisor to the combined fleet, brought up her latest analysis on the main screen. Her research had become crucial to understanding how the mechanical enemy thought and planned their operations. They've been studying our psychological profiles for months now, she reported. The Vexhi are attempting to develop countermeasures for what they classify as irrational behavior patterns in organic species. Essentially, they're trying to build artificial intelligence systems that can predict and counter actions that don't follow logical decision-making processes. Colonel Wu Jin, whose ground forces had successfully defended 6 different worlds using tactics that alien military observers still couldn't fully understand, shook his head. Good luck with that project. Humans have been trying to understand human psychology for thousands of years. We still haven't figured ourselves out completely. The comment drew what passed for laughter among several alien species, but the mood in the war room remained focused and determined. Everyone present understood that they were planning what would likely be the final battle of the war. Win or lose, this engagement would determine the fate of organic life in the galaxy. The Vexhi have made one critical error throughout this conflict, Admiral Park said, calling attention back to the strategic situation. They have assumed that because we come from death worlds, we are simply more aggressive or violent than other species. They have completely missed the real difference. Commander Haye Jin, who had been with Admiral Park since the first impossible deployment from Earth, understood immediately what her commanding officer meant. We didn't come here to conquer anything. We came here to help. Exactly, Admiral Park confirmed. Every human ship in this theater of operations volunteered to leave Earth's defenses to answer a distress call from beings we had never met. The Vexhi can analyze our weapons, adapt to our tactics, even predict some of our strategies. But they will never understand the fundamental motivation that drives everything we do. Captain Byung-ho, now commanding a task force that included ships from 7 different species all using human combat doctrines, brought up the operational briefing for the final assault. Admiral, Earth Command reports that the second wave reinforcements are ready for deployment. The new fleet includes 200,000 vessels, with approximately 60% being Allied ships now crewed by mixed human-alien teams. The raid numbers represented something unprecedented in galactic history. What had started as a desperate human response to an alien SOS had grown into a coalition that spanned dozens of star systems and included species that had been enemies for centuries. All of them united by the simple principle that some fights were worth joining, regardless of the personal cost. Admiral Park moved to the center of the war room and activated the fleet-wide communication array. Her image appeared on screens throughout the largest military force ever assembled in the galaxy. Human ships flying alongside Thorian battle, cruisers, luminary science vessels converted for combat, and dozens of other species who had learned that courage was contagious. All ships, all allies, this is Admiral Ginny Park, she began. her voice carrying to millions of beings scattered across 3 sectors of space. In 6 hours, we will face the largest Vexhi force ever assembled. Intelligence estimates suggest they are committing every remaining resource to this final battle. They expect us to fight like civilized beings, with careful strategies, calculated risks, and acceptable loss ratios. She paused, and her expression transformed into something that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. It was the look that alien species had learned to recognize as the moment when humans stopped thinking like rational beings and started thinking like forces of nature. They are about to learn that when humans answer a distress call, we don't come to fight a civilized war, we come to win an impossible one. And we've taught our friends that impossible is just another word for difficult. Throughout the fleet, beings from dozens of worlds prepared for battle using tactics that their ancestors would never have imagined. Thorian warriors studied human concepts of acceptable sacrifice. Luminary scientists calculated the emotional impact of seemingly irrational tactical decisions. Quilran researchers analyzed the psychological effects of fighting for principles rather than territory. The galaxy had changed. Earth's response to a simple distress call had created a new standard for what it meant to help others. Species that had lived in peace for millennia had learned to fight with the desperate courage of Deathworlders. Civilizations that had never known violence had discovered that sometimes war was the only way to preserve peace. As the final battle approached, one thing was certain. The Vexhi were about to face not just the human fleet that had first answered their victims' call for help, but an entire galaxy that had learned to fight like humans when the stakes were high enough. The age of civilized warfare was over. The age of Deathworlder principles had begun, and the universe would never be the same.